The diplomatic banquet hall of Nexus Prime hummed with the mingled sounds of 47 distinct species engaged in the delicate dance of interstellar politics. Suspended in the gravitational sweet spot between three binary stars, the station represented the pinnacle of collaborative engineering, a gleaming testament to what could be accomplished when the galaxy's brightest minds set aside their differences. Dr. Mara Ellison adjusted the collar of her diplomatic corps uniform and tried not to stare at the menagerie of exotic creatures accompanying the various ambassadors. The annual Companion Bonding Festival was in full swing, and, as the newest human representative to the Galactic Corps, she was expected to participate. The problem was, she hadn't brought the customary ornamental pet that most delegates paraded around as status symbols. First time at the festival, a voice like silk over gravel came from behind her. Mara turned to find herself face to face, or rather, face to thoracic sensory ridge with Ambassador Trellix of the Vesperi Collective. The insectoid diplomat's translucent wings caught the light from the artificial sun panels overhead, casting rainbow patterns across the polished obsidian floor. "Is it that obvious?" Mara smiled, accepting a glass of iridescent nectar from a hovering service drone. "You're the only one without a companion creature," Trellix observed, mandibles clicking in what Mara had learned to recognize as amusement. "And you keep looking at everyone else's with that delightful human expression, wide eyes, slightly parted lips. Curiosity? Yes." "Guilty as charged," Mara admitted. "I've spent my career studying interspecies communication, but I've never seen such diversity in companion animals." Indeed. The hall was a living exhibition of the galaxy's most exotic life forms. The Quillari ambassador, Karath, strutted past with a crystalline serpent coiled around his shoulders, its scales shifting through patterns of light that seemed to harmonize with his elaborate ceremonial headdress. Behind him, the ethereal delegation from Mist Collective floated with cloud-like companions that changed shape to mirror the emotional states of their bonded partners. "They're not just animals," Trellix corrected gently. "They're extensions of ourselves, living representations of our cultures, our values, and our status," Mara added, watching as Ambassador Karath deliberately positioned himself beneath the central illumination, causing his serpent companion to throw dazzling patterns across the assembled dignitaries. Several delegates gasped appreciatively, exactly as he'd intended. "That too," Trellix admitted, antennae dipping slightly in what Mara recognized as mild embarrassment. Karath's luminal serpent was genetically tailored by the finest bioengineers in the Quillari Confederation. It costs more than some planetary defense systems. Mara nodded, sipping the nectar, which tasted like honey infused with stardust. "And yours?" she asked, gesturing to the small sphere of undulating plasma that hovered at Trellix's side. "A plasma dancer from the corona of our home star," Trellix said, gesturing with elegant forelegs. "They live naturally in the upper atmosphere, but this one was born in captivity. 17 generations of selective breeding for color vibrancy and emotional receptivity." "It's beautiful," Mara said sincerely, watching as the creature pulsed from deep azure to violet in response to Trellix's evident pride. "And your companion will arrive?" Trellix inquired delicately. Mara smiled enigmatically. "Day 3 of the festival. I'm still making preparations." "How mysterious!" Trellix's wings fluttered with excitement. "The human delegation usually brings those small, furry quadrupeds with the wet eyes." "Puppies," Mara supplied. "Yes, adorable little things, but hardly original. I look forward to seeing what you'll contribute to this year's festivities." As Trellix drifted away to join a cluster of delegates admiring the ambassador from Tau Ceti's floating garden of bioluminescent fungi, Mara felt Commander Reese materializing at her side with military precision. "Having fun?" he asked, his voice carrying the permanent edge of someone responsible for the security of 5,000 souls aboard an isolated space station. "Anthropological field study," Mara replied, nodding toward Karath, who was now demonstrating how his serpent could reshape itself into a perfect replica of the Quillari royal crest. "I've counted 14 distinct violations of natural evolution in that creature alone," Reese grunted, his eyes constantly scanning the room. "Just tell me your companion isn't going to cause me paperwork. The Agrelian ambassador Songbird nearly caused an interplanetary incident last year, when it harmonized with the station's emergency frequency." Mara patted his arm reassuringly. "Don't worry, Commander. Everything is under control." His eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what people say right before I end up filling out incident reports." "Trust me," she said, finishing her nectar. "I'm a xenobiologist. This is literally my job." "That's what worries me," Reese muttered, before his comm unit chirped, and he excused himself to attend to some security matter elsewhere on the station. Alone again. Mara circulated through the gathering, pausing occasionally to admire particularly interesting companions and exchange pleasantries with their owners. Most delegates were politely curious about her lack of a companion, though a few, notably Karath and his immediate circle, exchanged knowing looks that clearly communicated their assumption that humanity simply couldn't compete in this particular arena of galactic one-upmanship. Later that evening, as the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night, Mara made her way through the service corridors of Nexus Prime, her diplomatic credentials granting her access to areas usually off-limits to all but station personnel. At the far end of the station's secondary hub, she entered a heavily secured containment bay, nodding to the security officer on duty. "Evening, Dr. Ellison," the officer said, barely looking up from her console. "Your package is stable. Vitals normal across all monitoring parameters." "Thank you, Ensign Zhang," Mara replied, approaching the massive reinforced enclosure that dominated the center of the bay. "Has she eaten 3 synthetic protein compounds and approximately 20 liters of enriched mineral solution?" Zhang reported. "The station AI notes that her metabolic rate indicates satisfaction, but not satiety." Mara nodded, placing her palm against the transparent barrier. Inside, partially obscured by an artificial rock formation designed to mimic its native habitat, lay 18 feet of coiled muscle, iridescent scales, and predatory intelligence. The Nephi Stalker, one of the most feared apex predators in the Orion Spur, shifted slightly, its primary sensory ridge rising to acknowledge Mara's presence. 6 secondary eyes, arranged in a precise geometric pattern across its armored skull, opened one by one, glowing with amber bioluminescence. "Hello, Artemis," Mara said softly, her breath fogging the barrier between them. "Tomorrow, we show them what a real bond looks like." In response, the creature's dorsal crest extended, revealing complex patterns of bioluminescent cells that flashed in a sequence too deliberate to be random. Mara smiled, recording the pattern with her neural interface for later analysis. "I know," she murmured. "They're not ready, but they need to understand." The creature Artemis settled back into a coiled position, but kept its primary sensory organs oriented toward Mara. There was an unmistakable intelligence in that gaze, one that sent shivers down Mara's spine every time. Not fear, though anyone else might have mistaken it for such. No, it was something far more profound: recognition. The acknowledgement of one intelligent being by another across the vast evolutionary gulf that separated their species. "Get some rest," Mara said finally, stepping back from the barrier. "Tomorrow will be interesting." As she turned to leave, Ensign Zhang cleared her throat awkwardly. "Dr. Ellison, are you sure about this? I've seen the security specs on that thing. It's classified as a Category 1 biological hazard on 17 worlds." Mara paused at the door. "Artemis isn't a thing, Ensign. She's a highly evolved predatory organism with cognitive capabilities that rival some sentient species. And yes, I'm sure. It's just some of the other security personnel are talking. They're saying this is some kind of political stunt. Let them talk, Mara said, her voice gentle but firm. By this time tomorrow, they'll understand. Or they'll begin to. Anyway. The second day of the Companion Bonding Festival passed in a blur of speeches, demonstrations, and thinly veiled competitive posturing as each delegation attempted to outdo the others with increasingly elaborate displays of their companions' abilities. Mara attended the mandatory diplomatic functions, smiled at the appropriate moments, and deflected questions about her own companion with practiced ease. "I hear you've got something special planned for tomorrow," said Dr. Leah Singh, Mara's research partner and the station's chief xenobiological consultant, as they shared a quiet dinner in Mara's quarters that evening. "News travels fast," Mara observed, pushing synthesized protein around her plate. "This station runs on gossip more efficiently than it does on antimatter," Leah replied with a grin. "Also, I have access to the containment bay logs. A Nephi stalker. Mara, really." Mara set down her fork. "You've reviewed my research. You know what I've discovered about their communication abilities." "Yes, and it's groundbreaking work. But this isn't a scientific conference. It's a diplomatic circle jerk where ambassadors show off their prettiest, most docile status symbols." Leah leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "These people don't want to be challenged. They want to be impressed in ways that confirm their existing worldview." "Maybe that's the problem," Mara said quietly. "We've spent 2 centuries in space, encountering incredible diversity of life, and we're still stuck in the same old patterns. Humans domesticate wolves, make them into lapdogs, and suddenly, we think every species in the galaxy should be reduced to an ornament or a curiosity." Leah sighed, recognizing the familiar passion in her colleague's voice. "I support your research, you know that. But I'm worried about the political fallout. Karath already has it in for the human delegation after we negotiated exclusive mining rights in the Cygnus sector." "This isn't about politics," Mara insisted. "Everything here is about politics," Leah countered. "And bringing an apex predator to a diplomatic pet show is definitely making a statement." Mara pushed her plate away, no longer hungry. "I've established a genuine communication protocol with Artemis. It's not control or dominance, it's partnership. That's what the Bonding Festival is supposed to celebrate, isn't it? Not who can display the most expensive genetic monstrosity, but actual connection between species." "In theory, yes," Leah conceded. "But in practice..." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire station and, by extension, the complex web of interstellar politics it represented. "Well, maybe it's time for practice to catch up with theory," Mara said, her jaw set in the stubborn expression Leah knew all too well. "Just promise me you've taken every precaution," Leah said after a moment. "I've read the incident reports from Proxima Colony. These creatures can strip a habitat module to component atoms in minutes." "That was different," Mara insisted. "Those were juveniles, disoriented from improper handling during transport. Artemis is mature, stable, and most importantly, we understand each other." Leah studied her friend's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I trust you. But maybe give Commander Reese a heads up. His blood pressure isn't what it used to be." Mara laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "He already suspects. But yes, I'll brief him first thing tomorrow." Morning arrived with a subtle shift in the station's lighting, programmed to mimic the dawn of Earth's northern hemisphere. Mara rose early, reviewed her notes on Artemis's communication patterns, and sent a formal notification to Commander Reese's office. His response came almost immediately, a terse acknowledgement, followed by a request for a full security briefing before the day's festivities began. The meeting was brief but intense, with Reese peppering Mara with technical questions about the Nephi stalker's physical capabilities, behavioral triggers, and containment protocols. You're telling me this creature can reconfigure its molecular structure? He demanded, scrolling through the biological profile on his tablet. Only partially, and only in response to specific environmental stimuli, Mara clarified. It's an evolutionary adaptation to the extreme pressure variations on their homeworld. Think of it like an octopus changing color and texture, but on a more fundamental level, and you can control it. Mara chose her words carefully. I can communicate with her. We've established a mutual understanding based on a combination of vocal signals, pheromonal markers, and bioluminescent patterns. It's not control in the way you're thinking, it's more like a conversation. Reese pinched the bridge of his nose. Dr. Ellison, I respect your expertise, but my job is to ensure the safety of everyone on this station. If that thing... Mara corrected automatically. If she decides that the central atrium looks like a hunting ground, I need to know exactly how to stop her. She won't, Mara assured him. But, as a precaution, I've developed a specific harmonic sequence that induces a temporary state of sensory recalibration, essentially. It's overwhelming to her neural system and causes a brief shutdown of all non-essential functions. A sonic weapon, Reese translated. An emergency communication protocol, Mara insisted. Reese studied her for a moment, then nodded briskly. Fine. I'm authorizing this against my better judgment, but I'm also tripling the security detail and placing containment specialists on standby. At the first sign of trouble. There won't be any trouble, Mara said confidently. 3 hours later, as gasps of horror and disbelief echoed through the central atrium of Nexus Prime, Mara was beginning to reconsider that statement. The day had begun, according to plan. The final day of the Companion Bonding Festival traditionally culminated in a formal presentation ceremony, where each delegation introduced their companion to the assembled diplomatic corps. The presentations followed a carefully choreographed order based on the length of each species' participation in the Galactic Alliance, with newer members presenting last. As one of the more recent additions to the interstellar community, humanity's presentation was scheduled near the end of the ceremony. Mara had spent the morning in the containment bay with Artemis, reviewing their communication protocols and adjusting the specialized transport unit that would allow her to safely bring the Nephi Stalker to the central atrium. The first hint of trouble came when she arrived at the service entrance to the atrium and found not only the expected security detail, but also Ambassador Karath and 2 members of the Station Ethics Committee. Dr. Ellison, Karath greeted her, his tone falsely cordial. We received some concerning reports about your chosen companion for today's ceremony. Mara straightened, meeting his gaze directly. My companion has been fully cleared by station security and poses no threat to anyone present. That remains to be seen, said one of the committee members, a Tellurian whose name Mara couldn't recall. There are strict protocols regarding the introduction of predatory species to diplomatic functions, all of which I've followed to the letter, Mara replied calmly. Commander Reese has personally reviewed and approved all safety measures. Nevertheless, Karath continued smoothly, the committee feels that a preliminary inspection would be prudent, for everyone's peace of mind. Mara recognized the political maneuvering for what it was an attempt to force her to reveal Artemis before the formal presentation, thereby diminishing the impact of her demonstration and giving Karath time to prepare his inevitable objections. I'm afraid that won't be possible, she said, matching his false courtesy. The transport unit is specifically calibrated to minimize stress during transition. Opening it prematurely could compromise those settings. Karath's facial membranes flushed a deeper shade of violet, a sign of irritation among the Quillari. Dr. Ellison, the committee has the authority to observe established protocols. Yes, Mara interrupted smoothly. And protocol states that all companions are to be formally presented during the ceremony, not beforehand. I'd be happy to address any concerns immediately following my presentation. Before Karath could respond, Commander Reese appeared in the doorway behind him. Is there a problem here, Ambassador? Krath's membrane fluttered briefly before settling back to their normal hue. No problem, Commander. Merely a procedural clarification. Good, Reese said briskly. Because the Arcturian delegation is about to conclude their presentation, and we're running on a tight schedule. With a final, calculating look at Mara, Karath and the committee members retreated, taking positions near the front of the assembly, where they could observe her presentation in full view of the other diplomats. He's up to something, Reese muttered as they watched Karath depart. Of course he is, Mara agreed. But it doesn't change anything. Are we clear to proceed? Reese nodded, gesturing to the security detail to take their positions around the transport unit, a sleek, cylindrical pod with adaptive opacity controls that currently rendered it completely opaque. The Arcturian presentation concluded to polite applause, and a soft chime indicated that humanity's turn had arrived. Mara stepped forward, the transport unit hovering silently beside her on repulsor fields as she took her place at the center of the atrium. Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Alliance, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. It is my honor to represent Earth in this year's Companion Bonding Festival. She paused, looking around at the assembled dignitaries and their exotic companions. Karath's crystalline serpent was now draped across his shoulders like living jewelry, its patterns shifting in lazy, hypnotic sequences. For centuries, Mara continued, humanity has formed bonds with other species on our homeworld. From the wolves that became our most loyal companions to the horses that carried us across continents. We have always sought connection with the other intelligent beings who share our planet. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. This was familiar territory, comfortable platitudes that everyone expected from a human representative. But too often, Mara said, her voice taking on a new edge that caused several delegates to lean forward in their seats. These relationships have been based on domination rather than partnership. We've bred aggression out of predators, independence out of pack animals, wildness out of the wild, creating creatures that reflect our desires rather than respecting their nature. The murmurs shifted in tone, becoming uncertain. This was not the traditional speech of admiration and cultural pride that normally accompanied these presentations. As we've ventured into the stars, Mara pressed on, we've encountered life forms that challenge our understanding of intelligence, communication, and symbiosis. And yet, we've largely continued the same patterns, seeking to domesticate rather than communicate, to control rather than collaborate. She gestured to the assembled companions throughout the atrium. Each of these beings represents something valuable about your cultures, your histories, your values. But I wonder how many represent true partnership between species. Karath shifted in his seat, membrane pulsing with barely suppressed anger. Several other delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Today, Mara said, placing her hand on the transport unit, I'd like to introduce you to a different kind of bond, one based on mutual respect and genuine communication between distinct, evolutionary paths. She pressed her palm against the unit's control panel, and the opacity settings began to shift, gradually revealing the massive form within. As Artemis came into view, 18 feet of coiled muscle, armored scales, and predatory grace, the atrium erupted in gasps and exclamations of shock. This is Artemis, Mara announced calmly over the growing tumult. A mature female Nephi-stalker from the high-pressure zones of Proxima Centauri b. Several delegates rose from their seats in alarm. Karath was on his feet instantly, membrane fully flushed with outrage. This is an outrage, he declared, voice cutting through the chaos. A mockery of our sacred traditions. The transport unit completed its transition to full transparency, revealing Artemis in her entirety. The Nephi-stalker remained perfectly still, her primary sensory ridge extended but calm. All 6 eyes focused intently on Mara. Ambassador Karath, Mara acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. I understand your concern, but I assure you, you bring a Class 1 biological hazard to a diplomatic gathering and call it a companion, Karath interrupted, gesturing dramatically for the benefit of the other delegates. This creature has decimated 3 colony worlds. It's an apex predator, not a domestic animal. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Even delegates who normally opposed Karath's political positions were nodding in support. Artemis is indeed an apex predator, Mara agreed calmly. But she is also a highly intelligent being capable of complex communication and sophisticated problem-solving. My research has... This is not a scientific symposium. Dr. Ellison, Karath cut in again. This is a celebration of cultural traditions, and you have turned it into a dangerous spectacle. Commander Reese stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral, despite the tension evident in his posture. Ambassador, I assure you that all security protocols have been observed. The creature is contained and poses no threat to the Assembly. The fact that it requires such protocols proves my point, Karath retorted. Look around you. None of our companions need armed guards to prevent them from slaughtering everyone present. More murmurs of agreement. Louder now. Mara noticed several delegates edging toward the exits, their own companions exhibiting signs of distress in response to their bonded partner's anxiety. If I may, Mara said, raising her voice slightly to recapture attention. What you're witnessing is precisely the point of my presentation. Artemis does not require these guards. They're here to ease your fears, not to control her. To demonstrate, she pressed another control on the transport unit. With a soft hiss, the transparent barrier between Artemis and the Assembly retracted, leaving nothing between the Nephi stalker and the horrified diplomats. Several security officers raised their weapons reflexively, but Reese held up a hand, stopping them from taking action. His eyes locked with Mara's in a silent question. Are you sure about this? Mara gave him the barest nod, then turned her attention fully to Artemis. The stalker had risen slightly from her coiled position, her primary sensory ridge fully extended as she took in the unfamiliar environment and the multitude of alien scents, sounds, and electromagnetic signatures that filled the atrium. A tense silence fell over the assembly as everyone waited for the inevitable disaster, for the predator to launch itself at the nearest target, for security to open fire, for the diplomatic incident that would set human relations back decades. Instead, Mara produced a small device from her pocket and emitted a complex series of whistles, clicks, and subharmonic tones. In response, Artemis's dorsal crest extended fully, revealing the intricate patterns of bioluminescent cells that flashed in precise sequences: blue, amber, violet, patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid mathematics. Artemis is communicating, Mara explained to the stunned assembly. These patterns aren't random. They're a sophisticated language of light and color that corresponds to specific concepts and intentions. She produced another series of whistles, and Artemis responded by slowly uncurling her massive body, stretching to her full length before settling into a new position that brought her massive head level with Mara's. Gasps echoed through the atrium as the true scale of the creature became apparent. But Mara showed no fear, as those 6 amber eyes focused intently on her. Our bond isn't based on genetic manipulation or dominance, Mara continued, reaching out slowly to place her hand against Artemis's primary sensory ridge. It's founded on mutual respect and genuine communication between 2 different but equally valuable forms of intelligence. For a moment, it seemed as though Mara might actually succeed in shifting the narrative. Several delegates were watching with cautious fascination now, rather than horror, and even Karath had fallen temporarily silent. Then, the station's emergency lighting flashed red, and a computerized voice announced, "Warning system anomaly detected in Sector 12. Gravity fluctuations and atmospheric pressure irregularities reported. All personnel please report to designated safety zones." Commander Reese's comm unit chirped urgently. He listened for a moment, his expression growing increasingly grim, before turning to address the assembly. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored delegates of all designations, we are experiencing some minor technical difficulties. As a precaution, I must ask everyone to proceed calmly to the nearest emergency shelter. Is this part of your demonstration? Dr. Ellison, Karath demanded, his membrane now pulsing with agitation and alarm. First a predator, now a convenient emergency. I assure you, Ambassador, this is entirely unrelated, Mara replied, though her attention was divided as she observed Artemis's sudden change in behavior. The stalker had shifted position again, her sensory ridge now oriented toward the eastern corridor that led to Sector 12, all 6 eyes focusing in the same direction. Throughout the atrium, other companions were also showing signs of distress. Karath's crystalline serpent had coiled itself tightly around his arm, its light patterns cycling rapidly through warning colors. The Mist Collective's cloud-like companions had contracted into dense, roiling spheres. Even Trellix's placid plasma dancer was emitting rapid pulses of deep crimson, a color Mara had never observed in the species before. Commander, Mara said quietly, moving to Reese's side. Something's wrong. All the companion species are displaying acute stress responses, including Artemis. Reese's comm chirped again, and his face paled slightly as he listened to the report. Sector 12 has been sealed, he announced, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone trained to manage crisis situations. We have reports of an unknown entity breaching the outer hull. Security teams are responding. But I must insist that all diplomatic personnel proceed to emergency shelters immediately. As if to punctuate his words, the station shuddered slightly, and the lights flickered. In the momentary dimness, Artemis's bioluminescent patterns stood out in sharp relief, no longer the calm, mathematical sequences of before, but rapid, jagged bursts of color that radiated from her central nervous system outward. She's sensing something, Mara murmured, watching the patterns with growing concern. Something that frightens her. The implications of that observation sent a chill down her spine. Nephi stalkers were apex predators, creatures that had evolved at the top of their food chain with virtually no natural enemies. For Artemis to display fear, the delegates were moving now, some hurrying toward the designated shelters, while others gathered their companions and sought reassurance from security personnel. Karath made a point of passing close to Mara, his membrane now a mottled pattern that indicated extreme agitation. If your demonstration has compromised the station's integrity, he began. Ambassador, Reese interrupted firmly. Now is not the time. Please proceed to Shelter Alpha with the other priority delegates. Karath hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to continue his political attack and the very real fear evident in his companion's behavior. The crystalline serpent had now wrapped itself so tightly around his arm that the limb was beginning to show signs of restricted circulation. This isn't over, he said finally, allowing himself to be ushered toward the shelter by a security officer. As the atrium emptied, Mara turned her full attention back to Artemis. The stalker remained fixated on the eastern corridor, her massive body now coiled in a posture that Mara recognized from their training sessions, a pre-strike configuration that allowed for explosive forward movement. Commander, she said urgently, I need to stay with Artemis. Whatever's happening, she's responding to it in a way that suggests immediate threat. Reese hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the unprecedented situation. Dr. Ellison, my orders are to ensure all civilian personnel evacuate to secure areas. I understand, Mara replied, but Artemis may be our best sensor for whatever is breaching the station. Look at her. She's tracking something specific. Before Reese could respond, the station shuddered again, more violently this time. The lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency power kicked in, bathing the atrium in an eerie blue glow. In that moment of darkness, Artemis's bioluminescent patterns had blazed with renewed intensity, not in the chaotic fear response of before, but in a precise, pulsating sequence that Mara had never observed. "Something's coming," she whispered, more to herself than to Reese. The commander's comm unit erupted with a cacophony of urgent reports, voices overlapping in a chaos of technical jargon and escalating alarm. Reese listened intently, his expression growing darker by the second. "Security teams in Sector 12 are not responding," he reported grimly. "Whatever breached the hull is moving through the station, and it's moving fast." As if summoned by his words, a strange sound echoed from the eastern corridor, a liquid, metallic scraping that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the station itself. Artemis's response was immediate and unmistakable. Her dorsal crest flared to its full extension, and her massive jaws opened to reveal rows of crystalline teeth designed to shear through the armored exoskeletons of her natural prey. "Mara," Reese said, dropping formality in the face of escalating crisis. "We need to go. Now." But Mara stood transfixed, watching as Artemis's bioluminescent patterns shifted again this time into a sequence that she recognized from their months of work together. It wasn't fear or aggression. It was a question, an inquiry directed specifically at Mara. "She's asking what I want her to do," Mara realized aloud. Before she could respond, the metallic scraping sound grew louder, and something emerged from the corridor into the blue-lit atrium. Mara's scientific mind registered several observations in rapid succession. The entity was roughly humanoid in overall configuration, standing approximately 3 meters tall on 2 lower limbs. Its surface appeared to be in constant motion, as though composed of thousands of interlocking metallic segments that flowed like liquid while maintaining overall structural cohesion. It possessed no discernible sensory organs, analogous to eyes or ears. Yet its head, a somewhat more dense concentration of the flowing material, oriented unerringly toward Mara, Reese, and Artemis. Most disturbing of all, parts of the entity's surface bore distinct patterns that Mara recognized as components from station equipment communications arrays, atmosphere processors, and most chillingly, security barricades. "It's assimilating our technology," she breathed, understanding blooming with horrifying clarity. "It's not just breaching the station, it's consuming it." Reese had drawn his sidearm, a standard-issue plasma disruptor, though he kept it aimed at the floor for the moment. "Mara," he said again, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "We need to evacuate. That's a direct order." But Mara's attention was fixed on Artemis, who had begun a new pattern of bioluminescent signaling, rapid, complex, and directed specifically at her. The message was clear to Mara after months of studying these patterns. The stalker recognized the entity as a threat, not just to Mara but to the entire station, and was offering to eliminate it. The entity took another step into the atrium, its fluid metal body rippling as it absorbed a communications panel from the wall beside it, the technology seeming to melt into its form. "Commander," Mara said quietly, never taking her eyes off Artemis, "I need you to trust me. Artemis can stop this thing." "That's not a risk I'm authorized to take," Reese replied, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. The entity was advancing steadily, and they were running out of options. "It's consuming our technology," Mara insisted. "Your weapons might just make it stronger, but Artemis is a product of natural evolution, not human engineering, and she's hunted things like this before." That last part wasn't entirely accurate. Nephi stalkers had never encountered anything quite like this entity, but Mara recognized the predatory intelligence in Artemis's behavior. The stalker was analyzing the threat, calculating approach vectors, preparing for combat in a way that no programmed security system could match. Reese hesitated, his training warring with the unprecedented situation. "How can you be sure she won't just attack us instead?" "Because we understand each other," Mara said simply. Then, making her decision, she produced the whistle device again and emitted a complex sequence of sounds, the communication protocol they had developed over months of patient work. The response was immediate and spectacular. Artemis's entire body flared with bioluminescence, patterns cascading from her central nervous system outward in a coordinated display that communicated clear intent. Then, with a grace that belied her massive size, the stalker launched herself across the atrium toward the entity. What followed happened so quickly that Mara's human senses could barely track the details. Artemis moved with a fluid precision that made the entity's metal flow body seem clumsy by comparison. Her armored scales shifted texture and density as she moved, adapting to the combat in real time, another evolutionary feature of her species that Mara had documented but never seen deployed in actual combat. The entity responded with surprising speed, portions of its fluid metal body elongating into blade-like appendages that slashed at Artemis with lethal intent. But the stalker was already adjusting, her body twisting in ways that seemed to defy conventional physics as she evaded the attacks. Then, Artemis struck not with her formidable jaws as Mara had expected, but with a specialized organ that extended from beneath her sensory ridge. The organ pulsed with intense bioluminescence for a fraction of a second before discharging what appeared to be a concentrated burst of energy directly into the entity's central mass. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entity's fluid cohesion faltered, sections of its body briefly losing synchronization with the whole. Artemis pressed the advantage, her massive jaws now engaging to tear away chunks of the destabilized metal flow substance. Unlike organic prey, the entity didn't bleed or show conventional signs of injury. But Mara could see that Artemis's attacks were having a cumulative effect. Each bite removed material that the entity couldn't immediately replace, and the energy discharges from the specialized organ seemed to disrupt whatever force kept the metal flow in its cohesive state. The battle moved across the atrium with astonishing speed, both combatants demonstrating levels of agility that seemed impossible for their size. Furniture was overturned, decorative installations shattered, and the polished floor scored with deep gouges as the entity fought desperately against the relentless predator. Commander Reese stood beside Mara, his weapon still drawn, but held unused at his side, his expression a mixture of awe and professional assessment. "She's driving it back," he observed quietly. Mara nodded, her attention fixed on Artemis's bioluminescent patterns, which had shifted into what she recognized as a hunting sequence, methodical, calculated bursts that indicated the stalker was not just fighting reactively, but executing a deliberate strategy. The entity appeared to recognize its disadvantage. It attempted to retreat toward the corridor from which it had emerged, perhaps seeking to escape or to access more station technology to assimilate. But Artemis cut off the route with a burst of speed that left afterimages in Mara's vision, positioning her massive body between the entity and potential escape. With a final, brilliant flare of bioluminescence that momentarily illuminated the entire atrium, Artemis discharged the specialized energy organ once more, this time with an intensity that caused Mara to shield her eyes. When she could see again, the entity was dissolving. The metallic flow that had constituted its body was breaking down into inert components, no longer moving with purpose, but simply collapsing into a pile of what looked like metallic sand. Artemis stood over the remains, her massive head lowered to inspect them, sensory ridge extended to detect any lingering threat. Apparently satisfied, she emitted a final pattern of bioluminescence, a communication directly to Mara that translated roughly as "threat neutralized." The atrium fell silent, except for the distant wail of emergency sirens and the occasional crackle of damaged systems. Mara approached Artemis slowly, aware that Reese was following a few paces behind. His weapon now holstered, but his posture still alert. "Good girl," Mara said softly, extending her hand to touch Artemis's sensory ridge, a gesture that would have been suicidal for anyone who hadn't established the bond they shared. "You did exactly right." Artemis's dorsal crest rippled with gentle pulses of blue-green light satisfaction. Mara had learned to recognize. The massive predator had exerted herself significantly during the combat, but showed no signs of injury beyond minor abrasions where the entity's metal flow blades had managed to connect. "Dr. Ellison," Reese said formally, though there was a new respect in his voice, "I believe we owe you and your companion an apology, and our thanks." Before Mara could respond, the atrium doors slid open to admit a security team in full tactical gear, followed by several station administrators and, somewhat surprisingly, Ambassador Karath. The Quillari diplomat had apparently abandoned the safety of the shelter to witness the aftermath firsthand. The security team faltered at the sight of Artemis, standing unrestrained in the center of the devastated atrium, their weapons rising instinctively. "Stand down," Reese ordered sharply. "The situation is under control." Karath moved forward, his crystalline serpent once again draped across his shoulders, though its patterns were still cycling through stress colors. The ambassador surveyed the scene, the destruction throughout the atrium, the pile of metallic residue that had once been the entity, and Artemis, standing calmly beside Mara. "It would appear," he said carefully, membrane, shifting through complex hues that Mara couldn't entirely interpret, "that we may have misjudged the nature of your companion bond. Dr. Ellison." Mara inclined her head slightly, accepting the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive from the proud diplomat. "Artemis responded to a threat to the station, to all of us. That's what true companions do. Ambassador. They protect those they've bonded with." Krath's membrane pulsed thoughtfully. "Indeed. Though I confess, I had not anticipated such a practical demonstration." One of the station administrators stepped forward, a Vesperi-like Trellix, though older, her wings showing the iridescent patterns that indicated senior status within their hierarchy. "The station council will want a full report on this incident," she said, her mandibles clicking in what Mara now recognized as their expression of intense curiosity. "Both on the nature of the entity and on your methods of communication with the Nephi stalker." "Of course," Mara agreed, "though I should return Artemis to containment soon, despite her calm appearance. This has been an intense experience for her." The Vespari administrator nodded, wings fluttering in acknowledgement. "Naturally, but perhaps, before you do, you might explain to those of us who witnessed this remarkable event. How did you establish such a bond?" "The Nephi stalkers have resisted all previous attempts at domestication or training." "That's just it," Mara said, stroking Artemis's sensory ridge gently. "I never tried to domesticate or train her. I approached her as one intelligent species approaching another with respect, patience, and genuine curiosity. The whistles you heard aren't commands, they're conversations." Karath moved closer, studying Artemis with new interest. His crystalline serpent shifted nervously on his shoulders, but didn't display the panic it had shown earlier. "And the patterns of light?" he asked, gesturing to Artemis's still glowing dorsal crest. "Their natural language," Mara explained. "The bioluminescence evolved as a communication system for hunting packs in the deep pressure zones, where sound doesn't travel effectively. What you're seeing now is essentially Artemis talking." "Talking," Krath repeated, his tone somewhere between skepticism and wonder. "And what is she saying?" Mara smiled, interpreting the steady pulses of blue-green light. "She's saying she's hungry after all that exertion, and wondering when we'll be done with all this standing around." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the assembled group, tension breaking in the face of such an unexpectedly mundane concern from the fearsome predator. "Then, by all means," the Vespari administrator said, mandibles clicking in amusement. "Let us not keep her waiting. Commander Reese, please arrange an escort for Dr. Ellison and her companion back to the containment bay. The rest of us have much to discuss about today's events." As security personnel formed a respectful perimeter around Mara and Artemis, Karath stepped forward once more, his membrane now pulsing with a hue that Mara recognized as formal respect, a color reserved for equals in Quillari diplomatic protocol. "Dr. Ellison," he said, voice pitched to carry to the others present. "While today's events were not what any of us anticipated, they have certainly given us much to reflect upon regarding the true nature of companionship between species. Perhaps, when things have settled, you might consider sharing more of your insights with the diplomatic corps." The invitation was clear, not just a personal request, but a formal acknowledgement that Mara's approach had value within the diplomatic community. It was as close to a complete reversal of his earlier position as Karath could manage while maintaining his dignity. "I would be honored, Ambassador," Mara replied with equal formality. Then, producing her whistle device, she emitted a brief sequence that prompted Artemis to follow her toward the exit. The massive predator, moving with surprising delicacy through the damaged atrium. As they left, Mara heard Karath addressing the assembled officials. "It seems we have much to reconsider about our traditional approaches to interspecies bonding." 6 months later, Mara stood in the newly reconstructed central atrium of Nexus Prime, watching as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the quarterly diplomatic summit. The space had been rebuilt, following the incident now officially recorded in station logs as the Entity event, with subtle but significant changes to its design. Most notably, the central platform where presentations took place had been expanded and reinforced to accommodate companions of all sizes and configurations. "Quite a change from the last time we were here," observed Dr. Leah Singh, who had joined Mara at the observation balcony overlooking the gathering. "In more ways than one," Mara agreed, nodding toward Ambassador Karath, who was engaged in animated conversation with the representative from Earth's Mars colonies. The crystalline serpent still adorned his shoulders, but its patterns now shifted in what appeared to be genuine response to the conversation rather than mere decorative display. "I hear the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps has officially revised the companion bonding protocols," Leah said, sipping from a glass of the same iridescent nectar that had been served at the ill-fated festival. "Something about emphasizing genuine communication and mutual respect between bonded species." Mara smiled. Karath championed those revisions personally. Apparently, after witnessing Artemis in action, he spent 3 months working with xenobiologists to establish better communication with his own companion. Turns out, those crystalline serpents are significantly more intelligent than anyone realized. They just never bothered trying to actually talk to them before. "And how is Artemis?" Leah asked, glancing at the sleek monitoring device on Mara's wrist that displayed real-time data from the containment bay, where the Nephi stalkers still resided when not participating in carefully controlled research sessions. "Thriving," Mara replied, checking the readouts with the automatic gesture that had become second nature. "The Station Council approved the expansion of her habitat module, and we've been working on refining our communication protocols. She's actually helping us develop translation algorithms for other predatory species." Below them, the diplomatic proceedings were beginning. Mara noted with satisfaction that the theatrical displays of previous gatherings had been replaced by more substantive demonstrations of genuine interspecies communication. Several delegates were actively engaged in complex exchanges with their companions, using techniques that Mara recognized from her own published research. "Dr. Ellison?" Mara turned to find Commander Reese approaching. His uniform crisp as always, but his demeanor noticeably more relaxed than during their previous encounters. "Commander," she greeted him warmly. How goes the endless battle to keep this station secure? Considerably easier now that we've implemented some of your xenobiological security protocols, he replied, with a hint of a smile. Those biometric sensors based on Artemis's sensory capabilities have already prevented 2 potential breaches. Glad to hear it, Mara said sincerely. Actually, Reese continued, that's partly why I'm here. The Galactic Security Council is convening next month to discuss standardizing these protocols across all major diplomatic installations. They've requested that you and Artemis attend as expert consultants. Mara raised an eyebrow. Both of us? Both of you, Reese confirmed. Apparently, after reviewing the full data from the entity event, they've classified Artemis as a sentient security consultant rather than a biological specimen. First time that designation has been applied to a non-domesticated species. Leah laughed aloud at this. Sentient security consultant, I bet that's got the bureaucrats in knots. You have no idea, Reese said dryly. The paperwork alone has kept my administrative staff busy for weeks, but the precedent it sets, that's what matters. Mara nodded, understanding the significance. It wasn't just about Artemis, or even about the Nephi stalkers as a species. It was about fundamentally changing how humanity, and by extension, the entire galactic community, approached relationships with other intelligent life forms. We'll be there, she promised. As Reese departed to attend to his duties, Mara returned her attention to the diplomatic proceedings below. Ambassador Trellix was now addressing the assembly. The plasma dancer, hovering at his side, no longer a mere ornament, but an active participant in the presentation, its patterns shifting in what Mara now recognized as a form of simultaneous translation. You know, Leah said thoughtfully, when you first told me about your plans for the bonding festival, I thought you were just trying to make a scientific point. I didn't realize you were starting a revolution. Mara smiled, watching, as across the galaxy, beings of all species began to truly see each other for the first time. The best revolutions, she said quietly, are the ones where everyone wins. On her wrist, the monitoring device pulsed with a pattern that only Mara could interpret. Artemis, reaching out across the distance, participating in her own way in the transformation she had helped to inspire. Not as a pet, not as a weapon, but as a partner in the greatest adventure of all understanding.